And of course, we have to refer to Francis de Sales. You know, he says that the raising of a house or family is not about a fine residence and possessions. It's about the good education of your children in the fear of God and in virtue. And no pains should be spared in this. Children are the crown of their father and mother. And that is a really standard Judeo-Christian belief. Children are a crown for their parents. They're arrows in the quiver of their parents. They're a joy for their parents. Sometimes during the adolescent years, I know you may have to remind yourself of that, but they truly are a joy for their parents. So to begin, what is this time of adolescence all about? And I always go back, way back to Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson wrote this 50 years ago, but I think it's a really great definition of what adolescence is all about. He talks about identity formation, a process, okay, in which the individual judges himself in the light of what he perceives to be the way in which others judge him, in comparison to themselves and to a typology significant to them, while he judges their way of judging him in the light of how he perceives himself in comparison to them and to types that have become relevant to him. So what's he saying? He's saying basically that this adolescent, this time when your son is developing his identity, he's doing it based on what all kinds of people think about him. And he's taking all that information and he's filtering it, and he's trying to make it work with what he thinks about himself and also what he thinks about you, or the people who are thinking something about him. And this is why, you know, during this process, so often peers become so important, because he's had you, his parents, to bounce off of for years. Now he has all these peers, and peer influence becomes very important during these adolescent years. But he's taking what you think of him, what your family thinks of him, what your friends think of him, what his teachers think of him, his coaches think of him, his friends think of him, his girlfriend thinks of him. He's taking all these things, putting it together with what he thinks of himself, and trying to come up with an identity of who am I? Who am I? And that really is the big, big work, the big job that he has as a teenage boy. So what are some issues for adolescents today? Issues for adolescents today, for boys, obviously a huge one is their sexually maturing bodies. That's a huge one. And coupled with this physical development of their sexually maturing bodies, they have volatile emotions, like that, they can go off on something. They have a very complex social network, like I already said. You, your friends, their family, their peers, their teachers, their coaches, all of these people in the social network, peer relationship. They have wildly changing moods, a lot of mood swings. They have personal values, and they're trying to develop even more personal values. They're introduced to tobacco, alcohol, and drugs. They have parent relationships to deal with. They have school to deal with. Getting sleep. Most teenagers don't have enough sleep. Planning the future. Who am I? And, you know, if they're raised in a religious family, they also have these religious questions about religion and spirituality. And this one author says it's the perfect storm, because they have all those issues, all of those things they're dealing with, and then they come to high school and they have new problems. There is more pressure, there's less supervision, intense insecurity, pressure to prove themselves, and there are girls and there's sex. And, you know, boys especially constantly compare themselves with one another, constantly. And boys are competitive. Men, we guys in here, we are competitive. You know that. Males are competitive. That's how it is. And so we're constantly measuring ourselves against one another. You know, this is, this thing here, it's where you see in high schools, I think, like at the freshman level, you see some of this stuff of what group do I belong to, what group do you belong to, I'm in this group, so you're not in this group, so, we can make fun of you and all that kind of thing. Interestingly, by the time they're seniors, there's none of that, none of that. And I think, part of the antidote for all that is what we keep saying here at St. Francis: be who you are and be that well, and respect who you are. Respect one another and whoever those other people are. One of the best things that happens with our students when they go on service trips is that they come back and they realize on their own, we have so much and we really don't need it. We have so much stuff, but they do have too much stuff. They also have oftentimes too many choices, too many choices. There's a guy here, he's a senior this year. I remember when he came in as a freshman, one of his biggest problems, he wanted to do everything. And he could not do everything, but he had too many choices. He was a bright young man, talented athletically, socially, well-adjusted. He wanted to do everything: student government, sports, academics, clubs, everything. And there's just too much sometimes. We had a guy one time came in to see me with his mother, talking about transferring high schools and all that. He's going on and on and on and on, and finally he says to his mother, "Why don't you just decide for me and tell me?" And sometimes it comes down to that. Sometimes it comes down to that. There's just too many choices, too many choices. And sometimes things go on too fast. Again, one of the things when our seniors come back from retreats so often, our seniors will come back from retreat and they often tell me, because they can't take their cell phones, they have silence, no TV, and they tell me sometimes, this was the first time in my life that I can remember that I ever had quiet. The first time in my life. They're 17 years old, 18 years old. First time I can remember in my life when I had quiet to just think. So many kids are scheduled for so many things. I knew that when Freddie from the funeral home, I knew him from Christ the King Church, and he was coaching the St. John's Middle School basketball team one year. They were playing 40 basketball games during the season. 40 games, that's a lot. That's a lot of games. High school kids only play 19 to 20. 40 games is a lot of games. But we have so many kids engaged in so many activities. Nobody just goes out in the backyard or a corner field anymore just to play. They're scheduled, involved in so many activities. Well, so those are some things about adolescence in general.